Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. I know it's not technically Thanksgiving yet, but for my last video before Thanksgiving, I figured I'd actually take the opportunity this year to review what has to be my favorite Thanksgiving movie ever. Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. Now, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles came out in 1987, was written and directed by John Hughes, and if you've seen any 80s teen movie ever, he was probably involved. He, better than really any other writer or director at the time, aside from maybe Steven Spielberg, really captured the way teenagers talked and acted and interacted in a way that was natural and relatable. In Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, while it's not a teen movie, the main characters aren't teenagers, it's not set in a high school, it doesn't really have a lot of those John Hughes tropes that you might expect from one of his movies. But I would say the writing in this movie is just as good, if not maybe a little better than some of his other teen movies. That's because this movie really does live and die by the writing, but also how our two main actors bounce off of each other, and the chemistry there is super important, and I'll talk about that later. This movie is the template for how to do a road trip movie well, with just two actors and a bunch of other shenanigans going on along the way. And in the hands of someone who isn't John Hughes, really good with naturalistic dialogue, this could get really annoying and really contrived really fast. But I am happy to say that this is not the case at all with Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. This movie is hilarious, it's got relatable characters, the chemistry is fantastic, and the pace of the movie is incredibly quick. You never feel like you've lingered too long in any one location because you're just constantly concerned about getting back to Chicago. And I guess now's a good time to bring up how this is a Thanksgiving movie in a genre that is actually pretty limited. I can't really think of many other Thanksgiving movies to even lump this with, aside from the Charlie Brown specials. But basically we have Neil Page, who you could say is our main character, even though him and John Candy have about the same amount of screen time. But we do start with Neil Page, and we're really looking at this through his eyes for the most part. And he works marketing for some big magazine company in New York, but he's trying to get home so he can celebrate Thanksgiving with his family in Chicago. And maybe this is just because I wasn't around in the 80s, but the kind of economy that can support a lifestyle where you work in New York City and live in Chicago just amazes me. But because of that, he has to catch a flight to get back home, and right away we know things are not going to go well for him on this trip. First, he has trouble catching a cab, and then when he gets to the airport, he gets on the plane, he gets bumped to coach instead of the first class that he paid for. And to make it worse, he has to sit next to probably the most annoying person on the planet, Del Griffith, played by John Candy. And John Candy is phenomenal in this movie. I'm personally not the biggest fan of John Candy in most of his movies. I think he's alright and he's funny enough, but here I love his performance, because at first you see everything from Neil's perspective and you're like, oh, this guy is so insufferable, he's obnoxious, he's got all these little idiosyncrasies that just come off as inconsiderate, but he also has these big puppy dog eyes, and when he looks at you with the sympathy and kindness of someone who means well, it's really hard to get that upset with him. And that's the predicament that Neil Page finds himself. He's just constantly annoyed and irritated at this person, but at the same time he's not really doing anything wrong or criminal or just outright rude. He's just weird. So at first he tries to just go with it, just not let it get under his skin. But then O'Hare, the airport in Chicago, gets closed because of this big snowstorm, so they have to touch down in Wichita, Kansas. And I don't exactly know where Wichita is, but I know where Kansas is, and that's just not close enough. Around this time you start to understand that this is a what else could go wrong type of movie. You know the movie I'm talking about, the kind of thing where you have a main character and just everything that can go wrong does go wrong until they inevitably shout, what else can go wrong? And then something else goes wrong. But I very much respect this movie for not going all the way with that trope, because at no point does any character in this movie shout, what else can go wrong? Because that is just such a cliche. But that is exactly what type of movie this is. And it's when he realizes he's stuck in Wichita for the foreseeable future, Del actually offers to give him a place to stay. It's the Braidwood Inn, and he knows the owner, so he can be sure to give him a room. And then when they get there, it turns out it's only one room that they're gonna have to share, and there's only one bed, and they have to share that. So again, bad to worse, Del Griffith has not gotten any less annoying. If anything, he's gotten more annoying. And it's in this motel room when they're trying to go to sleep, and Del is just as loud as humanly possible, trying to clear his sinuses. You can feel the tension winding up like a guitar string until it snaps, and Steve Martin just unloads on this guy. They have their big blow up, which in a lesser movie, or really just any other movie with this formula, they would save the big blow up till somewhere around the midpoint, or maybe even right before the third act, where you have their big fight and they go their separate ways to mope, and then they end up coming back together in the end. Planes, Trains, and Automobiles doesn't do that. Again, John Hughes knew what he was doing in crafting this story. He got the big blow up out of the way because you can see it coming a mile away. You know that there's only so long Neil Page is going to endure this before he just has to let loose. And they have their argument and they get it out of the way, and then they just kind of cope after that. And that is so refreshing, because at no point do they go their separate ways and mope and waste 10 to 15 minutes of the runtime, because you know they're just going to be brought back together again. And so because of this argument that they finally aired out their grievances, they can actually move forward with their relationship. Because you know by the end of this movie they're going to be best friends, because there's no way these two people are going to spend the entire movie together and still end up hating each other in the end. So getting that blow up out of the way, now they can actually start bonding and having some lighter moments, and the tension of getting under each other's skin is all out of the way. They've already discussed that. We can move on. So then the next morning comes and they get train tickets because the plane didn't work, so maybe the train will take us all the way to Chicago. And for a little while it looks like that's what's gonna happen. They're on the train, they're chugging along, and then the train explodes. Now, it doesn't really explode, it just kind of overheats and it just starts smoking, and they have to shut it down, and they just have to walk like a mile or so to the nearest town. So they hop on a bus, but that only takes them as far as St. Louis, Missouri, which is closer. And it's here in St. Louis where Neil Page offers the splitting up approach, because he's just ready for this whole misadventure to be done. And for a while they actually do split up. And you know that this movie is working when you understand why Neil wants to split up, but when you look at John Candy, you know that he's just kind of all alone with this big awkward suitcase, and really he just wants a friend more than anything else. It is a little sad to see them split up, and for a while you actually think, yeah, this is it. They're gonna go. Although in the back of your mind, you know, like something has to happen to bring Del back into the picture. But really for a while, this is the Neil Page show. We see him try to get a rental car to disastrous results. And this brings us to the scene that has to be the sole reason why this movie is rated R. Because while John Hughes is no stranger to rated R movies, he made a few of them, especially in the teen genre, because he actually wrote how teens talk, and there's quite a bit of profanity in those movies because it's just authentic. This movie doesn't really have that. It's a pretty clean script, and really for the 80s it could have probably passed as PG until he gets to the marathon reception desk after he had just walked I don't know how many miles across the parking lot, across the runway, across the expressway to get to this rental car place. And it's here where you realize that, oh, he was holding back when he blew up in the hotel room at the beginning of the movie, because he drops so many F-bombs during this scene. It's not even really a scene, it's just a monologue of him just demanding a car, any car, 4 wheels and a seat. And you just feel for this guy because you know what he's been through. And yeah, maybe you shouldn't be doing it to Ferris Bueller's high school secretary. She didn't do anything to deserve this. But it's still pretty cathartic to just have him unload on somebody. However, this is the one scene for me that just doesn't feel like authentic dialogue. It feels like a monologue that would have been written by a Hollywood screenwriter. Now, it's still a good monologue, and the creative use of the F-bomb goes from being funny to hilarious to just ridiculous. It doesn't feel natural in the way that a lot of John Hughes dialogue just feels natural. It's just kind of unfortunate that this scene, which is so iconic, for me doesn't feel as natural as it probably should. I don't know, for me I just see it more as an example of creative writing rather than naturalistic dialogue. But if you thought we were separated with Del Griffith for too long, well, he comes roaring back into the picture because he actually managed to rent a car, and after almost running over his head, offers him a ride back. So now our two friends are back together and they're driving all through the night, and you know this is not going to go well. You know that at some point this car is going to just be destroyed, whether it's being driven between 2 semis and just getting scraped up the sides, or when it gets caught on fire and the whole car just goes up in smoke. But the car does still drive, at least long enough for them to stay another night at another motel and have a little bit more bonding. And that's all good, except the next day, broad daylight, they get pulled over by a cop because the cop sees that this car is just not suitable for driving. And really after that, we're in the home stretch of the movie. They are so close to getting back to Chicago. Somehow Del found this cheese truck, which I think was a deleted scene because it just kind of comes out of nowhere. And they ride in the back of that until they get to Chicago. They've got train tickets that'll take them to wherever their respective homes are. And it's here where they finally say their goodbyes. And it's emotional because it's not just an annoyance that had tagged along. Now they've gone through this whole adventure, soldiers in arms that have gone through this war of attrition, just trying to get back home. And it really is kind of sad when you see them go and Neil gets on the train and he's thinking about all the things that he's going to experience when he gets back home. And then something really clever happens. He puts together through montage and flashes of what he's thinking about. Del Griffith doesn't have a home. He doesn't have a wife, the wife that he's been talking about loving and has such a great relationship with his wife throughout this whole movie. He starts to suspect that, well, maybe she's not alive anymore and Del's just kind of wandering and only getting by on his shower curtain ring salesmanship. So he loops all the way back to the train station and he finds Del just sitting there, lonely, nowhere to go. And he, out of the goodness of his heart and completing his story arc, invites him over for Thanksgiving. And that is truly the happiest moment in this movie, is when they finally arrive at this house, which looks exactly like the house from Home Alone. And he sees the family there, he sees his wife, he gives her a kiss, and he introduces his good friend, Del Griffith, as part of the family. And they celebrate Thanksgiving, and that's where the movie ends. And I love this movie so much. It's not really because of the comedy or the relationship between Steve Martin and John Candy, even though that is fantastic and it is really what makes this movie work at its core. But what I really love about Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, and why I watch it as often as I do, especially around Thanksgiving, is all the little touches, the little details that are just sneaking by in the background. And a lot of John Hughes movies, especially in the 80s, did this, where there just be random details that are fine if you don't notice it, but if you see it, it's just so much funnier. I thought I'd just take the remaining time I have to just talk about a few of them. And the first one I want to talk about is a pretty simple one. It's the handprints on the wall of the first motel that they stay in. That just makes me laugh. The idea of what kind of position they'd have to be in to make the handprints. That's a nice little detail. It lets you know what kind of a motel this is. And then you have this redneck guy, Owen, who's played by the Lizard from the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies. He agrees to drive them in the back of his truck for a stretch. And he's just got a great look, first of all. He's got this big wad of chewing tobacco in his mouth the whole time. After he shakes Del's hand, he spits and he wipes his face, and then he shakes Neil's hand with the same nasty spit-covered hand they just wiped his face with. And it just goes by so quick. You blink and you miss it, but it is there, and it makes me laugh. And the last little detail that I love is when they're at, I can't remember what station it was. It might be a bus station, it might be a train station. And they're just sitting there. It's the two of them next to each other. And then there's this third guy that doesn't move, he doesn't talk. He might as well be a statue. He's just this old prospector-looking dude, big white beard, and he's got a box. And it's a box of white rats. And there's a hole in the box, and there's just rats crawling in and out of the hole, crawling over his leg, and he is not moving. And just the random absurdity of that shot, that composition, just makes me laugh. And maybe that's just my sense of humor. And let me know in the comments if you've noticed these things or if you love them. And if there's any other little details that you like that really stands out to you in this movie, drop them in the comments, because I know this movie is full of them. Now I turn it over to you guys. What do you think about Planes, Trains, and Automobiles? Have you seen it? Do you watch it every Thanksgiving? Whatever you think, let me know in the comments. And if you like this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe for more content, and hit the notification bell to be notified every time I upload a video. And as always, I'm Colby. This is my Nerdy Talk, and I'll see you in the next video.